Hello, Chevre, how are you? Today is Erev Shabbos Kodesh Parshas Matos, Masei, Shabbos Chazak, Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Menachem Ov. Before we begin the thought of the week, first of all, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmis und beruchnes. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. We'll start with a tefillah, which is connected to the subject that we will speak about. And that is a pasuk from Tilim Kapitel Chav Gimel. B'nois deshe yarbitzeini, al mei menuchos yinaleini. He lays me down in dwellings amid green pastures. He leads me beside serene waters. First of all, right now it's winter in Melbourne. It's actually very cold. So I really I'm asking, I'd love to right now physically be amidst warm green pastures. Please, Hashem, make it warmer. But we could say there's a deeper meaning in this pasuk. And that is like the Rebbe spoke in the famous Sikha one year, Yud Shvat, where he said, person has a choice. There's one perspective where you could look at the world as a jungle, Hashem Yirachem. And there's another way you could look at the world as a garden. The Eibush is here, Bo Siligani. And that's the wonderful lesson of this pasuk, Bo Siligani. The Eibush looks at the world as his garden. He chose this world, and he resides in this world, and especially through our Torah mitzvahs. So this is what it means. If a person really lived with that perspective and that feeling that Hashem is with him, and that he's shielded and he's protected and nurtured and taken care of from Hashem, then he could be able to say, Hashem lays me down in dwellings amid green pastures. Life is good in the hands of Hashem. And the same thing, menuchos means serene waters. We want serenity. Menucha nefesh and menucha guf. Today's subject we're going to talk about is anger, which is like the complete opposite of menucha. Now, what's the connection? And it's very appropriate also for the 3 weeks and especially the 9 days. Something that we all have to work on. In this week's Parsha, after the Yidden fight the war with the Midianites, and they allow women to live, the pasuk says, Vayiktzef Moshe got angry because these women were not innocent. They're not innocents. They're not civilians. They're combatants. Because they were used as weapons to kill Yidden. It's like you have stories, I forgot what they're called. You have, when there's wars and enemies and they get a woman to seduce a foreign ambassador or a foreign military person and she steals secrets and etc., etc. So such a person is tried, as a spy and killed. So these women had the intent to start with, to come to the Bnei Yisrael, corrupt them, cause them to serve Avodah Zarah, which brought about the plague, which caused 24,000 Yidden to die. So they're guilty. That's why Moshe was upset that these women were not killed by the Yidden. Then later, after it says Vayiktzef Moshe about that, the pasuk says, when it speaks about the dinim, the halachas of Gulei Kelim, purging the vessels that belongs to a goy to make them usable for Yidden, the pasuk says, "Vayomer Elazar HaKohen el anshe hatzava habayim l'malchama zois chukas haTorah shetzivas Hashem." So all of a sudden we have Elazar giving over halachas. Moshe is the one. Moshe kibul Torah miSinai. Moshe knows all the laws. Usually, when we hear a new halachas, first Moshe says it. Vayomer Moshe. So Rashi right away on the spot. That's according to Rashi. He says, "Lefisha ba Moshe l'chal kas, ba l'chal tos." Because Moshe came into the category of anger previously, right before, as we mentioned, therefore he came into the category of error. Shenis almim memenu hilchos geulei goyim. The laws of purging of vessels were concealed from him. And then Rashi brings down another 2 places. So that's why it's very important to talk about in this week's Parsha. The 2 other places, the famous see Rashi, where Moshe became angry. And because of that, he made a mistake. Now, I just want to say a disclaimer to make it very, very clear that the Derech HaChasidus, not only Chasidus Chabad, but Chasidus of the Baal Shem Tov, all Chasidim, we look at Tzaddikim, Gemurim, like Moshe Rabbeinu, that it's not possible for them to sin. Ein lo Yetzer Hara, they do not have a Yetzer Hara. So not only is it not possible for them to sin, it's not even possible for them to have the potential to sin. They have no desire to sin. The inclination is not even there, etc., etc. This is in Tanya, but if you give a look in all the Svarim, the Magid Svarim, the Mezrusha Magid Svarim, the Kedushas Levi from the Levi Yitzchak Berditchever, the Noam Elimelech from Rebbe Elimelech Melezins, they're full of this concept that tzaddikim have no connection to sin. Now, obviously, we also have the rule, Ein mikri eitzim b'dei pshutai. Now is not the place to get into it, so there's a simple meaning to it. So therefore, I'm just saying, as we look at tzaddikim, are divine attributes. They're Gilui Elokus. Moshe Rabbeinu is a level of godliness. Just like Avram is Midas Chesed Atzilus, Yitzchak is Gvura Atzilus, and Yaakov is Teferes Atzilus. Every single holy tzaddik is a divine attribute of Hashem, walking on planet Earth. So, therefore, this whole concept, someone reading this, Hashem Yirachim, can make a mistake. You see, Moshe got angry, Moshe made a mistake, I could also get angry. Banish the thought from your head. There's no connection between your anger and Moshe Rabbeinu. But what does it mean? It's a good question. We have to look into the Holy Svarim to see how they explain it. But, nevertheless, since this week's Parsha mentions the concept, so therefore we have to take a lesson from it, and especially that it says clearly that the facts we can't argue with, Moshe Rabbeinu did not say the halachas of Gulei Kelim, and Moshe Rabbeinu did not go into Eretz Yisrael after he hit the rock, which that's another one of the episodes where Moshe became angry. So the lesson we have to take is, and also, by the way, in this case, Moshe's anger was correct. The Yidden made a mistake. They did something wrong. Moshe was right. But still, even when it's justified anger, we still have to be super careful with it. So I'm not here to explain Moshe Rabbeinu, but I'm taking the lesson for ourselves. So let's talk about anger. And this is another introduction to what we're going to say following, that since these shiurim, these thought of the weeks, and my intention is always to bring a Hasidic perspective, so therefore that's the stress. I'm not going to mention all the Maimarer Azal and whatever it says in all the Svarim about anger. We're going to go, cut to the chase and try to stick to what the Hasidic perspective is. Okay? So, we'll start Milmata L'Mayla. In our case, when I say Milmata L'Mayla, I mean from a lower level, from the more simple level. And that is, there was a certain stage. I'm not trained in psychology, so I can't know. But there was a time when I was young, like when I was 10, 12, where there was this concept where people would talk about pent-up anger and frustration, and they say, don't let it out on your child, or don't let it out on the other person. Take a box and smash it. Or take your chair that's broken anyways and smash it against the wall. So that pent-up frustration had a release, had an outlet. So that was a certain school of thought. So the first thing is, according to Torah, Yiddishkeit, and Chassidus, there's no such thing. The feeling itself is bad, and you're meant to suppress it. But what happens if you suppress it? It gets built up. See a local therapist. But I'm telling you what the Torah view is. And first of all, I remember in Chassidus, and I'm quoting now a Maimer from the Rebbe Rashab, where he quotes from the Reishis Chachma, and this is what he says over there. He brings down, when a person is in this state of anger, just go silent. Do not speak. Because if you'll be engaged in speech, then the anger grows. And this is the teichen of this famous Maimer Yom Tov Shalosh Shana Tov Rishon Tes, where he talks about how speech increases intellect, but he also talks about how speech also increases and causes growth to the emotion. Then I discovered something I never knew until today, and it's brought down in the Rebbe's Igros Kodesh, Chelik Zayin, Amud 116, and there's no footnote on it, so I don't know if this says anywhere else. The Rebbe wrote a letter to a person and giving him suggestions, and then he says in the letter that, I'm going to read you inside, I hope you're not angry with me, this is page 116, as I said before, Oy Zayin. Ich hoffe, als mein Vorschlag wird euch nicht aufregen. I hope my suggestion will not get you angry. Und allensfall, wenn I feel yeah, and even if it will get you upset, is wie es hat erzählt, Krei Kedushes Medi V'chami Adver B'Shem Doidoi Horazonish Masei. So then it should be like my father-in-law, the Friedrich Rebbe, said in the name of his uncle, the Razah, Reb Zalman Aaron Schneerson. As a fleck Zogin, the Friedrich Rebbe's uncle used to say, as we merekt sich auf, when you get angry, darf man abwarten l'chol ha'pachas 61 Minuten. Whenever you get angry, wait 61 minutes, und danach kann man trachten in der Sach, wie das ist, la mitose. Then you could think, like rationally, how the issue is in truth. So when a person's in a state of a rage or anger, in a way they say brains out the window, you become irrational. And that's one of the problems with rage and anger, that you lose control. So here the Razor said, take a pause, wait. And he says 61 minutes. And the Friedrich Rebbe quoted it. So that means that that's the way it is. And the Rebbe quoted it. So in case a person is in a state that he feels anger getting the better of him, so we see now two solutions. And I said like mamata lamaila, like we're starting like therapy steps. Number one, just go quiet, go silent. By going silent, that will cause it to dissipate. It will cause it the opposite of fanning the flame, so to speak. The second solution, we said, take a major pause, take a major wait. Actually, 61 minutes. You know, today's therapy would probably say take deep breaths, etc., etc. But here we're talking about 61 minutes. Und das hat der Friedrich Rebbe gesagt in the name of his uncle, and the Rebbe also said that. Now let's go to the real Hasidic approach. There's a Maimer Azal that the Maimer Azal says, Kol hakoyes kilu eved avodah zara. Everyone who gets angry, it's as if he served idolatry. Now over here, obviously, is a major question. How could you compare? Avodah zara is from the Gilui, from the Gimel Averis, which we say Yehorig Val Yaver. Those are from the three sins that a person is meant to die rather than transgress. And anger is just an attribute. Some people will say there's nothing wrong with feeling angry. The feeling itself is natural. You know? So how can we compare? And the comparison, not to just a sin, to the worst sin. The basis of Yiddishkeit is Hashem Echad. And we're saying, Kol HaKoyes Kilu Eved Avodah Zara. So over here we have the famous Alter Rebbe in Igeres HaKodesh Simon Chafei, which I will read to you, but then we'll analyze it a bit. So the Alter Rebbe says over here the famous words that Kol HaKoyes Kilu Eved Zara, Latam Movin Liyoidei Bina, and the reason is known to those who know understanding. And it could be that over here the reason is because, as we'll explain, because this really touches upon broader issues in the concept of the unity of Hashem. Anyway, so the Alter Rebbe says, Lafisha Beis Kaisoi Nistalka Mimenu Amuna. Because at the time when he gets angry, faith in Hashem has left him. Because if he would have believed that this came from Hashem, then he wouldn't be angry. And even if that other person who has free choice and is cursing him or damaging him and hurting him, and even financially, and that person will be held liable and be guilty, because he took the wrong choice, he made the wrong choice. But still, over here the Alter Rebbe says the famous words, Afal pikein ala nizik v'anigzim min hashamayim. Nevertheless, as regards the person harmed, the incident was already decreed in heaven. That other person has no power over you. It has nothing to do with him. It was the Eibishter. And v'har b'shluchim l'mokim. There's a separate cheshbon, reckoning, accounting going on, why the Eibishter made it that it should come to that person. But that has nothing to do with you and the way you have to look at it. So, in this itself, there's really two parts. Let's say the first part. I once heard from one of my mashpiyim that it says in the Magid Svarim that when a person gets angry because somebody did something to him and he's angry at that person, the Magid said it's like a child who bangs his foot on a table and then kicks the table and says, "Stupid table." What, the table did something to you? It's the same thing over here. It's the same exact thing. It's about the Eibishter. Instead of looking at it that it came through that person and that he was the delivery and he was the deliverer and the messenger, start thinking about the message. What is the Eibishter telling you? So this goes together with two axioms, two principles. Number one, that everything comes from Hashem. And after that comes the next thing, Kol ma da'ovid rachmana l'tabovid. Not only that it came from the Eibishter, but everything that the Eibishter does is for the good. So, if you don't acknowledge these two things, that it came from the Eibishter and that it's good, that means you lost your faith in Hashem, and therefore it's as if you served idolatry. But there's a deeper aspect to it also, especially in light of Chassidus, and being that we're already into this video for a while, so we're not going to elaborate, and we probably spoke about this many times, that one of the great innovations of Chassidus was stressing the idea that the oneness of Hashem doesn't only mean that there's one God. So therefore when a Yid says, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, he doesn't only think there's only one Eibishter, but he's thinking, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, there's only one reality. There's only one existence. And this is the whole basis of Shara Yichud Ve'emunah, as everyone knows, that great section in Tanya, the second part, and that's what it all speaks about. So too over here. Why is it Kilo Eved Avodah Zarah? It's not only because if we look at it in the simple meaning, because your faith in Hashem departed you, so therefore it's as if you think someone else has control, but it's also because as soon as you give credence, as soon as you give recognition to something else, that is Avodah Zarah, bedakos, in the subtle form, according to Chassidus. So it comes from your acknowledging that there's another existence. It doesn't have to be made out of wood and stone, and you don't have to bow down to it. But that itself, that you think there's another existence, even if you don't think it's another God, according to Chassidus, that is also a subtle form of Avodah Zarah. And now comes the second part of this. The Alter Rebbe in chapter 1 of Tanya says, Kas v'gaiva mi'esoid ha'esh. They go together. All forms of anger are connected to ego. So number one, this is what we just said. Somebody did something to you, you're angry. Oh, why? Because you attribute the happening to that other person. But then there's another aspect to it. It's because you look at yourself as you're Mr. Important. So therefore, I'm offended. So, for example, and I speak to people, I have connections, I have students, so many times, and I'm talking now from reality, somebody says, if I was so-and-so, they wouldn't treat me like that. It's because they look at me that I'm not so important, so therefore they treat me like that. And I understand it, and we have to be super sensitive to every single person. But now we're talking about each person looking at himself in the mirror. He didn't get invited to a simcha or something. Okay, so you're not so important. So that person didn't think you're so important. The only reason you're really going to get offended is because you think you are important. So you made yourself a big Matthias. Like, just take another example. You've seen all the videos the way Avadia Yosef, he how do you say in English? He used to give a glet, a soft pat on people's cheeks. But it looks like a shtickle slap. But it's a mild slap. But you hear the slap. So, let me ask you something. If Havadi Yosef went over to you and gave you this slap, and you're a Svadish Yid, would you be offended? No. You think it's the greatest honor. It was a sign of affection. Now, if you're standing in the street, sorry, and somebody would give you such a slap, you might get very angry. Who are you? What are you giving me such a slap? Correct. So you see that when it's somebody important, like Rabbi Avadia Yosef, giving somebody a slap and that person thinks it's an honor, it's no problem. The same exact act with a different dynamics, where a different system of importance of what you think of yourself, and all of a sudden you get angry. So a lot of the anger, as the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 1 of Tanya, kas v'gaiva miyisoid ha'eish. Much anger is connected to ego. Now, let's get back to kol hakoyes kilo eved avodah zarah. So you give credence either to the other person, that you gave him the power, that you say that he's the cause, Rachmana litzlan, and therefore you're angry at him, or you give credence to yourself. You make yourself important, and therefore you did that to me, Rachmana litzlan. But now, based on this, that means that kol hakoyes kilo avodah zarah, when a person's in a state of anger, it's like he's pushing away the Eibishter, because it's coming from the ego. And when a person's in a state of ego, and anger is a terrible manifestation and expression of the ego, that itself is bad. So now, let's talk in summation, practically relevance. So some people, like I mentioned earlier, they say anger is only natural. And it's very important if we're talking about laws of forgiveness, revenge, grievances. Okay, but you know what? That's all already measuring it in relation to how it's going to affect another. But what about the feeling itself? So now we're going to the Hasidic aspect. Let's get to the root cause. That obviously it starts in the mind. Paradigm shift, perspective shift. Look at everything as Eined Malvadoi. Look at everything as Achdus Hashem. Live like we said in the beginning of today's video, that it's a garden. The Eibishter is here. Everything is from the Eibishter. So it starts with the mind. So then, what are we dealing with? We're dealing not with the symptom, we're dealing with the cause. And we're not dealing with, like what we spoke about previously, about taking a wait or pause or being silent, because that means when you're already entering the stage of anger and you're dealing with solutions of how, steps to curb it. Over here we're going much deeper. We're saying the chassid, who learns chassidus Chabad, who works on himself to the degree that it shouldn't happen in the first place, because he went into his brain and he's learning chassidus about Eined Milvadoi, to see and train himself more and more how everything comes from Hashem. So therefore the anger doesn't start in the first place. So I'd like to finish off with two stories. One is very, very famous, and the other not so famous. So first I'll say the famous one, and that is the Yom Yom of the 29th of Tishrei. And I'll just read it in English and just bring out the point, because most of you probably know it. One of the householders in Mezhebush had a running argument with a fellow townsman. Once while he was in the shul of the Baal Shem Tov, he cried out that he would tear apart his adversary like a fish. He got angry and he said, you like you hear somebody say, I'm going to kill you. And he said, I'm going to rip you apart like a fish. Now, obviously, he didn't mean it literally. It was just like, in a rage, that's what he said. Hearing this, the Baal Shem Tov told his disciples to hold each other's hands and stand near him in a circle with their eyes closed. He told them to make a circle. They stood near him and they had their eyes closed. He then closed the circle by resting his own hands on the shoulders of the two disciples nearest to him. All the disciples suddenly screamed in terror. They had a vision of this person actually tearing apart his adversary like a fish. Wow, that's the story. So what the Rebbe brings out from the Yom Yom, he finishes off, and I'll just read the ending. This unequivocally shows that every potential has an effect, either in a material format or in a spiritual format that can be perceived only with a higher and subtler sensitivity. But now let's talk about the subject at hand, anger. So we're saying, guess what? Based on this ayim yim, you don't even have to say, I'm going to kill you. You don't even have to say, I'm going to rip you apart like a fish, which is in speech. Even if you think it, it's already problematic. First of all, it's already problematic because, like he says, even over here, that a thought is also something happening in this world, in a certain realm, on a certain level, in a certain dimension. So it shouldn't be happening even on a level of thought. And that level of thought also has consequences. But now we're saying, as soon as you're in a state of kas, kol hakoyis is not only about because what it's going to do to the other person, or because, like the Alter Rebbe said, what was mashman peri chafei, because you attribute that person as the one who did something to you, so therefore it's kol hakoyis kilo eved. We're going deeper. The second it's kol hakoyis, it's kilo eved. And why? Because you're attributing power to something that happened in the world, true. But it's also because in your mind, when you're in a state of kas, even in thought alone, and nothing's going to happen to anybody, that shows on your ego. Let's say, for example, you get up in the morning, you walk out to the car, there's a $500 ticket, you parked in the wrong spot. You're angry. You're not angry at anybody. Yeah, you're angry at the government. You can't say you're angry at anybody. You're upset and you're angry. But it came from the Eibishter. That's number one. And number two, maybe it's because you should have given more tzedakah that year. Who knows? Whatever, you have to make cheshbainis. I'm davening that you should go to court and argue and get rid of it. That's the way I have to look at the other person. But as far as yourself is concerned, you have to make a cheshbon nefesh. Maybe you should have given more tzedakah this year. But the point is, even feeling angry because you got the ticket is already problematic. Even though no one's going to get affected by that feeling of anger, that's only in your head. And you're not going to tell it to anybody. And it might have negative effects b'chlal in the world, who knows? The second story is a similar word. It says the following in Sefer HaSichos Tafshin Dalet Amud 12. By Hoid Kvei Kedusha Murav HaKodesh Marash, the Rebbe Marash had a Meshoros Yosef Mordechai. Meshoros, I don't know how you translate a Meshoros. He used to work in the house, like helping out. Ein Mol is Yosef Mordechai reinkommen in Sukkah mit Takas. He came into the sukkah, it was sukkahs. He came into the sukkah and he was angry. Mistam nicht verendigt sein Bezer in sich, in Kich, und ist reinkommen keisendik in sukkah. His job was he worked in the kitchen. Working in the kitchen could be stressful work. So that's what it seems like the Friedrich Rebbe is saying over here. He was upset from the work in the sukkah and he walked into the sukkah. He was upset from the work in the kitchen and he walked into the sukkah. So then the Rebbe Marash told him, he said, Mordechai. Obviously, it was apparent on his face that he was angry. He said, Mordechai, you're something special. You're a special person. You have to have respect for the schach. Schach hat nicht hold kin kas. Schach doesn't like anger. So from this story you see also, it's not about offending another person. It's not about you having thoughts of anger directed towards another person. It's not about anything that has to do with social relationships. It's your being in a state of kas, which is problematic. The sukkah doesn't tolerate it. So I'm talking to myself right now. I should live my life that my home doesn't tolerate kas. And the truth is, life doesn't tolerate kas. Existence doesn't tolerate kas. Because Vihine Hashem Nitzav Olav. Hashem is watching us all the time. We're under His care and His protection. And the Eibusha should help that we should all see that we get from Hashem Teiva Nirva Nigla and Chasadim Gluyim all the time. And therefore, of course, in continuation, Behemshah to what we spoke today, we will all improve in our Ben Adam L'Chaveroi with these anger issues and anger management, and our Avos Yisrael will improve, and this will obviously bring about more greater Avas Chinam, and the Gula Mitzvah Shleima, take it from Yad Mamish, posting from my home, Be'ez Shem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne.